Hello and welcome to the How to Thrive podcast. This podcast is hosted by me, Claire Sanders, and my sister and co-founder, Helen Silver-McMahon. Together, we are on a mission to empower individuals and teams with the human skills they need to thrive, maximising performance, minimising risk, and optimising well-being. If you'd like to find out more about how we can help your practice, please get in touch via our website, www.being-human.co.uk. I'm delighted to introduce Lewis Silken as one of our sponsors for today's podcast. Lewis Silken is a full-service law firm that works closely with organisations to help protect and enhance what matters most. Whether it's navigating an increasingly complex political and economic landscape or aligning legal strategy with broader business goals, their approach is thoughtful, commercial and deeply human. I've worked with Lewis Silken on a number of projects and have always found them to bring a brilliant combination of wisdom and warmth. Serious expertise delivered in a way that's engaging, practical and genuinely enjoyable to work alongside. Thank you to Lewis Silken for supporting the podcast and for the role you play in supporting in-house lawyers to thrive. Find out more about their work at www.lewissilken.com. I am delighted to introduce you to Lawyers on Demand, one of our sponsors for today's podcast. Many of our listeners will be all too familiar with the increasing pressure to deliver more value, operate efficiently, and bring meaningful insight into their organisations, often all at once. That's exactly where Lawyers on Demand comes in. Working with in-house legal teams around the world, Lawyers on Demand provides access to world-class flexible legal talent and innovative legal operations solutions. They support teams to build legal functions that are not only efficient, but truly strategic, responsive, and ready for whatever comes next. And just as importantly, they're also creating opportunities for legal professionals to work in more flexible and fulfilling ways, something we know matters deeply to so many in our community. Thank you to Lawyers on Demand for supporting the podcast and for helping reshape the future of in-house legal teams. You can find out more about their amazing work at www.lawyersondemand.com.
Well, it's difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy, but you nudge, and I sort of always say sort of creating ripples that become waves.
Welcome back. Welcome to this week's How to Thrive. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
Oh, how are the lions and tigers and bears? Oh my.
There were no tigers or bears, as I feel we've already covered.
Where have you been? What have you been doing?
So
listeners should already know this, because if you listen to
should.
the last episode, you'll be fully on board with this. Maybe we should do it like Peaky Blinders and not tell people, and they just have to catch up on everything to know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
No, we're not that mean. Come on, Helen, where have you been?
So I went to Namibia to speak at Thrive Namibia, very well named, which was a wellbeing conference for vets in Namibia and Southern Africa, which was absolutely amazing. We ran some focus groups and visited some veterinary practices before going off and exploring Namibia, which was absolutely amazing. Really wonderful country, and just need to go back now to finish exploring because there's so much to see and do. It's really, really wonderful. And the sun was out and it was wonderful.
And what was your highlight? Tell me what your highlight was.
Oh, so many, but probably visiting Etosha, which is like a national park, and seeing rhinos.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Yeah, lions, tigers, bears. Rhinos and lions and elephants and giraffes and springbok and zebra and jackals and hyenas, and the list goes on. But seeing everything in its natural habitat and just being able to observe these animals just in the way that they live, and felt very, very privileged to spend some time looking for them and seeing them. Although we saw a few imaginary animals as well, as in just our hope that we would see. I
was going to say, you saw imaginary animals? This sounds like a whole different type of trip. Oh, well, I'm glad you had a lovely time. I'd like to say that you've missed lots. I'm trying to even think what you've missed. You missed the sunshine coming out for the first time this year. I mean, that's quite impressive. What else have you missed? A lot. just plodding along here. But yeah, no, I'm glad you had a lovely time. Back to it now, though.
First day back at work
back
today.
to-
Don't worry. I'm back in the real world.
Good to hear. So today's podcast guest is a lady called Karen Sheriff, and she is joining us to talk about something called Red S. Well, no, actually, it's Red D, isn't it? She talks to us about. I'm not going to explain any more than that. Listeners can listen and find out all about it. Really fascinating conversation that feels really relevant for the time that we're living in now. So, yeah, take a listen and let us know what you think. Enjoy.
Enjoy.
Welcome to this week's episode of How to Thrive. We're joined today not only by Helen. Helen, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Excellent. I'm very well. I was going to say I'm on tenterhooks, but I think let's talk about the tenterhooks in one moment. Why I'm on tenterhooks, and also I'm really delighted to invite this week's guest, Karen Sheriff, who is the founder and executive director of Red D, and we will explore all about what that means momentarily. Karen, welcome to the How to Thrive podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. Now, I feel like before we start, let's just clear up why I'm on tenterhooks. And before we hit record, Helen mentioned that she's about to have a delivery. Now, regular listeners will know that when Helen has a delivery, that means Cookie's going to go absolutely bonkers. So brace yourselves, listeners, that there may at any moment in the next hour be Cookie's sound effects in the background. But I'm sure our wonderful producer will sort it out. But so that's why I'm on tenterhooks. Bear with everybody. Are you ready, Helen, to press mute quickly?
I shall try my best. I shall start warming up my hands now so I can act quickly.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Karen, welcome to the slightly wild How to Thrive podcast. I am really excited to have you here. We were just talking about before we hit record, like this kind of really crazy intrinsic way that we've come across each other and we know each other. And it all stems down from someone beating me running up a hill in Freeth by quite considerable margin, I think. But there we go. Essentially, we run a Freeth Hilly every year, and there's a fabulous local lady called Pippa who is a former. She was a professional athlete, wasn't she, Karen? Can I say that?
Runner. Yeah, so not bad. She was all right.
So obviously she beats me up the hill by some significant margin. Anyway, and she then went on and did a lot of work with Reds in sport. And then through a good bit of stalking, I came across Karen, which is why you're here today. So Karen, for the benefit of all our listeners, tell us a bit about you. Tell us a bit about Red. Tell us a bit about Red D.
Well, my background's I'm a clinical physiotherapist, so been a physio for quite a long time. And I worked in lots of different environments, but in high performance and then more specifically in the performing arts for the last 13 years in leadership roles. And I was did a role where I was head of healthcare at the Royal Ballet School. And in that role, I was tasked to kind of grow and create excellence and what an MDT should look like, kind of like an academy style setup for high performance. So I felt I was super lucky to do that. So I grew a service the way I kind of saw that vision and what I thought would be best for the young dancers that were under our care at the time. So that I grew a team from 1.5 people to 28 people over that time. And whilst I was doing that, a lot of the things that we were putting in place was excellence around something called relative energy deficiency in sports, or REDS. And I kind of got better at seeing it, screening for it, and kind of as a team thinking, how are we going to do this better? So essentially, REDS, relative energy deficiency, is when you are not eating enough, because we call it fueling, but we're not eating enough for our daily needs. So, and over time, when that's chronic low energy availability, that can become problematic, and that gives you a syndrome of impaired physiological and or psychological symptoms, and that impairs your well-being, it increases your injury risk and affects performance. So it's something that we've known in sport for a very long time, or much longer. It's been focused, and there's more research and focus in that area, hence Project Red S. Pippa runs that brilliantly. But in dance, they don't in all honesty, there hasn't been the kind of multidisciplinary healthcare teams to kind of look for it and spot it and talk about it, tell coaches what it is. People don't know what it is. So we created, I created these excellence around pathways there. And then I was essentially asked to take what I'd done there globally and set up a sister project to Project Red S, which is Pippa's project, last year, and create Project Red D. And that is Reds in dancers. It's exactly the same syndrome, but we kind of curate our information, our resources, our stories. So we're trying to get dancers' stories in the same way they will for runners, to help look at how we kind of create awareness, how we're going to prevent this syndrome, how are we going to collaborate with organizations, and how we're going to create essential change in this space, because that's kind of where we need to go. And so that's what I'm sort of tasked to do. Essentially, I was asked to change the world. So I was like, okay, by our seed funders, just took a breath and was like, I'll give it a go. But, I love it. I love, I think with the physio, it's all about being human, actually. So I think physios, I'm obviously biased, but are going to be great leaders, because I think physios are good at like problem solving and communicating. And I think we always see people as human first, because if you're rehabbing, you always want to know their personal goals, you want to know their why. And I think I always said I would go into physio, and I never wanted to be a sport physio because they're really annoying. And then I ended up working in a high performance and sport environment, and I've worked in rugby for sort of 7.5 years, and cricket. And but I love that kind of connection piece. I love that you're all trying to support someone's goals. And I love the fact you work within a team. So that's kind of when I've ended up, and now doing that on a really broad level.
So I'm fascinated by the whole kind of concept, but at its core, so I'd never heard of, before I spoke to you, I'd never heard of relative deficiency energy at all as a syndrome. Helen, had you?
No, I don't think I've heard it called that. No.
So ultimately, we're talking about people not taking on enough fuel to sustain their activity, and what's the impact of that beyond? What's the impact of that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people haven't heard of it. They probably have felt it, even on a short level. So our bodies are really good at adapting to short periods of underfueling. So when you're ill or something like that, but you feel pretty crap when you haven't been eating well, and you'll have low energy. You might have brain fog, that kind of thing. You're not going to want to get up and go as much as you would if you've had food and you feel good. So when you underfuel for long periods of time, essentially your systems will your body's really good at adapting. So it will start to shut down, but it's like we've only got so much energy, like a battery, or like they use a car analogy if you're looking at fuel. So like, what are we going to down regulate? So if it's a phone, some apps that you're not using will start to go into the background, and they'll down regulate. And that's exactly what happens with our body. So it will, for survival, it will sort of say what's deemed non-essential. So let's shut down our hormonal systems. Let's downregulate our bone health systems. Let's downregulate some of our brain functioning, our cognitive and our mental well-being. Kind of that will be how it plays out, functions. Our gut motility will slow down, because actually for survival, we will always move. So this will happen in anyone, but in high-performing athletes, runners, triathletes, dancers, anyone with essentially more output. So their energy output requirements are much higher, their training loads are higher. It's quite easy to slip into an energy deficient state just because you're training so much. So it can be very unintentional. But over time, you can get quite serious effects. So you can get repeated stress fractures, so you can get osteopenia, you can get kind of a really osteoporotic picture at an incredibly young age, because your hormones will downregulate. You need estrogen for good bone health. If you're female, your periods will be affected, or they may not start if you're a young person. Your puberty can be hugely delayed because your hormone system's downregulated. So these will be signs that something's not right. And then, your periods may stop or change. And if you're a male, then your testosterone will be affected as well. And that sort of shows in, it's sort of harder because it's less overt than a menstrual cycle, but you'll have lack of morning erections. will be a kind of sign if you haven't had a blood test. And then we know that the sperm quality can be affected as well. So there's new research coming out in that space in the kind of endurance athletes. So it can be quite serious, as well as the kind of emotional factors, the mental health. It can be obviously very linked to disordered eating and eating disorder. And these things don't go away. You know, you have crap bone density, that can stay for life. You don't hit your peak bone mineral density kind of 19, early 20s, then that doesn't come back. So we're sort of really focusing on, that's why it's important to hear those stories.
And I guess it's stuff that, so what you were saying about how your body, for that kind of survival instinct, will keep moving. So, you know, the dancers will keep dancing, the athletes will keep running.
Yeah.
But actually, so it's not until is it like, it may not be immediately obvious that there's something going on beneath the surface. It's only much later that it all like comes to a head. Is that fair, or?
It is fair. It is fair. But I think when you talk to people, they may say, oh, I did feel this, or I did notice that, or I wasn't sleeping well. I wasn't concentrating well in class. I wasn't able to pick up the steps. So as a project, what we're trying to do is educate our case, dancers, parents, coaches, as to what that might look and feel like. And to actually, because in high performance, it's just normalized so much. So what is common is normalized, but it isn't actually normal. So let's say change in menstrual cycle, feeling exhausted all the time, having multiple illnesses. People like you pick up loads more colds and coughs and colds and flu. You've got loads of injuries that don't that take a bit longer to heal. Like, that stuff isn't what I would necessarily call normal. And so what we want people to do is flag and go and get checked out, because it's a diagnosis by exclusion, and that's really, really important. So it has to sit under a physician. But there were lots of reasons why certain things may or may not happen, and that has to be always is important to check out. But what we kind of want people to do is ask the questions, just sort of say, well, how much are you eating? You know, if your schedule's from 8:30 till 6:30 p.m, where are the gaps in your training, in your day? How are you eating enough for that load? Because I think people just don't, especially if you're a young and growing person, because that needs a certain amount of energy as well.
Is this something that's particularly prevalent within dance? Because is there a culture of a certain aesthetic? Are you trying to achieve a sort of a particular physique, and has that become part of the culture that then makes it very difficult to know how to fuel and to stay healthy, because you're trying to go for this aesthetic all the time? Is that part of the picture?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, you know, we can't really get away from the fact that dance is an aesthetic art, or an aesthetic sport, if you like, or area of high performance. And I think other areas like diving, triathletes, we know they're more at risk. Gymnasts, the past rhythmic gymnasts. So they are, the way I see it, as if that we know this is a risk of our area of high performance, then how are we addressing it? The research will say that athletes with perfectionist tendencies will be more likely to have eating disorders, disordered eating. So I think it's about bringing those data insights and how important they are to create change. Like I say, that lived experience story. So it's not just a kind of abstract research term, and that research doesn't sit on the shelf. What we're trying to do as a project is make it accessible so that people can actually understand it. What does that mean? And then when I work with organizations or leaders, I'm trying to, and everyone's got different resources. Everyone, you know, someone in Germany, the healthcare will look different to the States, will look different to Australia. So it's working out within their systems what's possible. And then we kind of have a general gold standard, and then where they can do that, either internally or external pathways.
It's interesting because I listen to that and I'm like, you know, it'd be quite easy to kind of switch off and think, but I'm not a professional athlete, so I don't need to worry about that. But I feel like we live in a world now, a state now, where we are not taught about the importance of fueling our body. It's almost like we're taught the opposite, which is eat less, exercise more, eat less, exercise more. You know, it's all about that. And it isn't really the emphasis on actually we need to be fooling ourselves, because if we don't, we are going to, it is going to affect maybe our fitness in old age or later in life, or even more immediate than that.
No, I think, to your point, it is really hard, because you're right, society will speak like that and talk to that, and when the sort of people that I'm speaking to and the groups that I'm speaking to, I'm like, that is not a risk for you. So her parents say, well, like, should they be allowed sweets? Should they be allowed sweet? And I'm like, these are first and foremost. So one of my first slides is always, dancers are humans first. If they're human, what is that experience? What are we trying to create? Young people and if they're in full-time dance training, incredible, but they're still people first. And we wouldn't want to encourage any rigidity in food behaviours, frankly, in anybody, but certainly these populations. And those risks around obesity and sort of maybe the rules and regulations, or recommendations, I should say, in that populations isn't what we're talking about here. And they're not the risks here. The risks we've got here, they're quite complex, but actually it's quite simple. We know they're growing. We know they need more experiences. We know food is so hugely important. It's the only way we get energy as human beings anyway. So let's sort of not take that away.
So obviously a lot of work you do is in young dancers and kind of like the academy. Is it a problem in older dancers as well? And as I'm saying that, I'm like, are there older dancers? What's an old dancer? I don't think I've seen an old dancer. but yeah.
I think what's an old dancer has completely changed. People are dancing well into their 40s, but the healthier ones. But yeah, so my background is obviously working with the young people, and the project is a grassroots, up and top down. So 100% it affects professional dancers. So I've got dancers, and this is the beauty of stories, right? So stories bring connection, stories bring meaning, stories show it's not abstract, that it's lived and felt. And what I think is interesting in those stories, they tell us something new, right? Though our professional dancers are they're role models. They're the role models for our young people. So actually, when they speak out, that's so important. It's way more valuable than me speaking. It's that holds weight, and that they can be really emotional actually. If the person has reds, that's the symptom, and the culture within where they sit is that environment that allowed it to thrive. So we can make changes. We can protect breaks. We can look at loading. We can allow water bottles in the studio. We can allow toilet breaks. We can put food where it's actually visible, make food visible in the environment, make it okay culturally, change that kind of unspoken thing that we don't eat here, and make it accessible. So they can get it, because they have very little time between changeover often. So what does that look like? Create education. Those sorts of things are the kind of things that we try and encourage, really.
I think that's really interesting. I mean, the system approach, Helen.
Yeah, exactly. I love that changing. I mean, we know that culture takes a very long time to change, but it sounds like you're making steps in that, in the way of marginal gains, 1% at a time, of making real inroads into making food something that is normal rather than something that's actually a periphery. I'm really interested in a couple of things. I've been scribbling down little questions and notes. And the first one was that, how do you, I know obviously communication, education is fundamental in this area, but if you had somebody coming to start, they would just join the dance school, whatever that looks like. I'm afraid I'm a bit ignorant in that perspective. But if they were coming, is there a conversation to be had to help them understand, this is the information you need to succeed in this area. This is the kind of how we could teach you to understand what your body needs, and to how to manage that, what that looks like in your intake per day, and how you make that accessible and sort of spread out through the day, or what have you.
Yeah, and I think, like I say, my Pippa, who we referred to earlier, her lived experience was having reds as an athlete, so she knows what it looked and felt like, to her. My lived experience is in culture change and creating a culture change around that, which was incremental, which was, I had worked with an incredible team, and really the organisation put trust in me to create that when they didn't really know what it was themselves, if you know what I mean. But where we got to your point, was looking and managing. How do we find it? How do we then manage those individuals? And then it came broader and broader and broader. And then it was like, what we need to be doing is, once you've selected your dancers into, let's say in this case it was the Royal Ballet School, coming into the school, let's educate them, let's screen them. I stood up and did talk to parents. Like, this is where we sit as a school. This is the team. This is how we work. And I think it's like anything, right? This is the culture. What I was saying was, this is the culture we set. And I had, the artistic director and the team were completely on board with that. And this is why we work in the way we do. This is how it's so important. And then this is what we recommend for your young people. We're going to offer this screening today, which was strength training, blood screening, health screening. And then we're going to work with you. Like, that's what we do. And that's why we just want to pick up on anything before we go. And it just completely changed how they saw the healthcare team, I think, how the parents, like, that we prioritize that, because if we're like saying we think they're human first, and we know this is a risk of our area of performance. So what we are doing as a school is putting this safety net in place. Now, we were honestly well funded compared to like pretty much any other environment that I've come across. I haven't heard of anybody being able to do that. And I had an in-house multidisciplinary team, so it wasn't external. It was like 28 people. So it was like, I was lucky. But there are absolute lessons that we can learn from two other places. Do you know what I mean? Like, you can go, and that's why we're trying to create resources as Project Red D globally. So places could say, this is a risk. There is all this information that you need in this space. If they can't offer it themselves, then we'll hold that. But it is, it's different. Everyone, I always say, you can't see reds. You can't see it. It's because somebody's energy out, and everyone's tipping point will be different, because everyone's energy requirements will be slightly different for their growth, their maturation, or just as an adult, you're training loads your day. How are you commuting? How many children do you have? How are you caring for a parent? Whatever those are, that's load. So it's always in its like individual nuance to it, which is why we always, like, in an ideal world, people would speak to nutritionists one-on-one and kind of work with people individually. But there's definitely broad-based education that's applicable to everybody. And certainly if you know the kind of signs and symptoms, you can pick up on it really early and then reverse it quite well.
I was just going to, that leads me to my next question, but before then, I think I was going to say that's obviously also an important part of creating psychological safety within the environment, so that people can then come to you and say, I'm feeling this way. Can we have a chat about it?
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about that certainly a lot in my previous role, but I talk about that in environments now, and you have to have that psychological safety, and you have to be quite intentional about it. I think especially when it's quite new to a culture, to perhaps have that, and voice is, like I say, like dancer voices. It's just so baked in that they're quiet, they're silent. And so it's just like, how do we find that? How are we going to allow those pockets so that they can come forward if there's a problem?
How did you get an industry, or how do you get an industry which is fairly antiquated, like, is very traditional, to listen and allow you in? Because I can see the similarities, and bear with me here, listeners, between, actually ballet schools and the legal practices, which I know is a stretch, but really they're incredibly conservative. I mean, I've never been in a ballet school. I'm assuming I once did ballet as a 5-year-old. It did not go well. No one wants to see me in a tutu anyway. But that kind of, very, very conservative, very antiquated. They have set ways of doing things. This is the way it's always been done. You've got principals and partners who've been through it themselves. Like, how on earth do you get them to listen and change? Even that nudge, how do you nudge them a little bit?
Well, it's difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy to do. But you nudge, and I sort of always say with the project, and perhaps what I did before, it's sort of creating ripples that become waves, and it's where's they're in. So it's finding, ultimately, no environment, law, elite ballet, contemporary dance, whatever it might be, running, exists in a vacuum anymore. The world is much bigger, it's much more connected socially, and so that's just a fact. We don't live in a vacuum, and what used to be behind closed doors for mostly all the right reasons. I don't think anyone that's what they knew isn't. So if that's the case, what does it look like? What does it feel like? So, I used in my last role, actually, this was something that I was asked at the end of my time to give a talk back to the original donors of the program. And I feel a bit emotional talking about it, but it was like really emotional because I did this kind of like review of my 8 years there, and I feel emotional talking about it, which is kind of ridiculous. But I think what was emotional is that I was kind of blown away by the change I was able to create. And I don't know why I'm emotional about that. But I think you can do it. And someone said, nothing changes until it does. And I was like, yeah, that's sort of true. Like, you can create change. So I put in place PhDs. So I'm a big believer in data-led insights. I put in place a data analyst at the end, which took me, by the way, several business proposals to get through. But what that meant was I was nudging, I was changing. But I knew, for example, the Royal Ballet School being a relatively well-funded school, we almost had a responsibility to like help others and to understand. And we got this like curated environment where they live and they sleep and they do their academics and they do their dance. So let's understand it and let's try and draw out lessons, which of course is going to be very specific to us, but can help others. And I think that's what, as a project, I'm trying to do as well. So it will say, we're looking to do 2 research projects this year. We're about the impact of REDS in dance and a global look at this, so that I can support the change that's needed and understand the change that's needed. But, sometimes, again, going back to what you asked, it was like somebody might just look at like the finance of it, right? So there is a time loss aspect. So if somebody's injured and ill all the time, has serious injuries because they're exhausted, let's say, so they went over their ankle, but actually, was it an ankle sprain or is it that they're exhausted? Let's look at that a little bit more deeply. But there is a cost to that, to the environment. So there's a cost to the time loss. They're not in training. So if you're worried about pulling back on training to allow a bit of a less of a load, actually, you're losing 25% of your dancers at any given time through these injuries and illnesses. So I can kind of help places look at it from a financial perspective, and how much does it cost, looking at external referrals and scans and physio and doctors and surgery if they need surgery. So there is like an actual physical cost. And then of course there's the human, that some places will be like, let's listen to these stories, and they'll kind of lean more into the human element of that, or like present the data. We've got really great data coming out in dance. There's PhDs being put in to understand the loading pattern, and actually let's compare that to what we know in high performance, and is that actually really pretty high, especially for young people, but generally anyway. So I think it is hard, but I try and find the hook that might be that's going to create the change, and that will be different in different environments. But like I say, we're here to empower places, to not shame them, but to kind of use examples.
If you were to, and obviously it's about translating what works for high performance environments and bringing it into the everyday. Like, how would you transpose, I suppose, the work that you do in these elite environments into the everyday?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I think there's sort of a few points. I think one, the risk around silence. I think that exists in any culture and environment. I think there's one about longevity of career, and ultimately, fundamentally, you need to be healthy psychologically and physically to have a longevity of career. So that is about education. That is about listening to your body and knowing that everyone has their own tipping point into burnout, exhaustion, injuries, illnesses, whatever it might look like. I think fundamentally you need health for that. I think we have to kind of not normalize what might be common, like to your point about lawyers or what culture might exist. Let's perhaps not normalize that, and let's challenge it gently and appropriately to kind of create change. I think my experience, and maybe you can tell me if this, I was thinking about that transition makes people vulnerable, and for me, what's come through when I do these dancer interviews and people, ambassadors who are going to speak to this, what's really, really common, it's made me reflect more generally, is how vulnerable people are on transition points. So if they're moving country, either as a child, adult, moving across anywhere into a new environment, those have been all common triggers in my read stories, which has been really interesting for me to reflect on. And it's definitely something that's helpful for me to talk to organisations about, because that you can be intentional about how you onboard someone. And I can kind of come back to that when we talk about thrive. But I think that piece about being a human, yeah, you're a dancer, but you're human. You may or may not speak the language, doesn't matter. You may or may not know people. The food may or may not be there, but it can make people, that loneliness piece, and kind of like, if you're in an organization and you change job, like you can be quite vulnerable at that point. So I think that's something that I've reflected on. And also just this piece that I talk to a lot, that there's life outside of sport or dance, and there's life out afterwards. And I think that's like true of me and my job, and you and your jobs, and anybody else. And so if that is the case, because we know that creates protection as well, when identity is not fixed on being a dancer or an athlete or a lawyer or a veterinary nurse. So I think it's sort of like, how are we creating environments for people where we're not expecting that to be the case? So we're not just saying it, we're being intentional about how is their life outside of this. And I talk to parents about that as well. And it's, I'm a parent, and it's really easy to sometimes slip into that. But this isn't the be all and end all. And so what does that mean? And who are we as people outside of work?
So, do you know what? It's so interesting, because one of the things we talk about is this whole kind of how our identities get so wrapped up in our profession. I'm a lawyer. Oh, and I'm also Claire, and I'm a veterinary professional. I'm a vet. I'm a veterinary nurse. I'm a dancer and something else. It's like we become wrapped up, but actually, when you look broader than that and look at life outside and your fuller identity and your longer identity, I think it's incredibly powerful, but I think something that a lot of people are just really struggle with. I tell you, the other thing that I'm really hearing is this kind of this tendency that we have to be so stuck in our cognitive, like in that kind of the cognitive part of our being that informs how we think and how we do. But actually there is so much power that comes from our bodies, and like listening to our bodies and thinking about, we need our bodies and the fuel, and they need to be operating, and it all kind of sticks together, right? Like our cognitive won't function without our physical, and vice versa. So really interesting.
We can't separate the two. You can't separate the two, but also people don't always kind of attribute reduction in cognitive function in, have I eaten enough? And I talk to friends, so this is not an athlete problem. They just have higher training loads. It might be more prevalent in those populations. My friends I'll speak to around the table, one's a GP, and I was like, you sound like you have Rx. And also people don't understand, and GPs do not understand a lot about this. Like you said, you'd never heard of it. People haven't heard about it. So that's my kind of, that will be another toolkit and a plan to target GPs, because that's a really big thing, right? Who they see. A lot of what they will see could be symptoms of this Rett syndrome. The gut problems, the bloating, people come with these kind of unspecific things. It's like, ask them about their eating.
So I mean, like I have a very obvious, like I get so hangry.
She
for
does.
two things actually. I get really hangry, like to the extent where and to the extent where I just have to eat something. But also I have of late developed a shake in my right hand, and it is direct relationship to if I have not eaten, I like my hand will shake. And so it's kind of like these telltale things. We think, God, if that's the effect, it's quite. But I mean, we spoke about this, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but I suppose one of the things that immediately kind of popped to mind when we first spoke was about the relevance of all of this to what we're seeing with GLP-1 and things like Ozempic and all this, because it's taking away kind of this urge to eat, and kind of, are we like the long-term effect this can have on people, and about like the energy. And we're not going to take, it's not about taking a political stance or anything on any of those subjects, but I think that's really interesting, because certainly whenever I thought about it, I thought, but the short-term gain of like losing some weight, I've never thought about the long-term impact that could be there. But I think that's also a really interesting correlation.
Yeah, and it's not my area of expertise, but I was actually talking to a different GP friend about this, trying to understand a bit more about them from their perspective. But I think in a high, in the sort of populations I work with, or any high training loads, any athletic populations, it could be quite a frightening concept because they're quite freely available. It is also that short-term gain, isn't it? Like you say, it's human nature a bit. It just can look like this, but for me, will athletes think I could just look like this for this meet? I'll be lighter for this race. Dancers, I just want to get into this company. I just want to get this role. But we know the effects on bone density are really quite strong and prevalent. So you have to do it alongside strength training. Well, I was having this debate with someone, but dancers do not strength train generally. Now we're trying to shift that dial. Now, hopefully, in kind of more forward-thinking environments, more educated environments, they would. But it's not a norm, I would say, certainly for females as well. So what do they know? Would dancers know that if they do take anything short term? And I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard of it, but I think it will be a silent risk. So I'm actually was thinking I want to create a toolkit and education piece around it, because people aren't going to probably openly talk about it, but they've got to understand their risks, even higher risk, which is probably at risk anyway. So I just wonder where that will go, and thinking short term all the time, and thinking about aesthetic as the gain, not health. And they are different. And I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult as a human being to kind of perhaps not look around, but kind of trusting how you feel, and not trying to look at gravity on a scale as a sort of metric of your worth and value.
I listened to a podcast actually that's really stuck with me, and it was all about I can't remember who it was on now or who it was now, but she was basically talking about skinny fat, and she was basically saying about how you have to have that you've got the bone and then the muscle disappears, so you end up with bone and fat, and what you actually need is bone, muscle, fat. I'm absolutely shambolically summarizing this. But that's kind of the thought about it, and that actually muscle disappears. So you might be skinny, but it's just bone and fat. And what you really need to protect yourself is a thicker layer of muscle. And I thought that was really interesting.
In high performance, obviously, that's where your strength and power comes from. So it's fundamental. And for older people as well, it's a cushion, right? So you fall, you want cushioning. So yeah. It's not there's no quick fixes, I think.
But it's interesting though, because I have unfortunately had to stop going to the gym because I have a problem with my back. But I was doing cardio on the bike and then yoga. And what I noticed when I started doing strength training as well is that everything improved so much better. I was so much better at yoga. I was so much better on the bike, and it was also complementary. And obviously my physical health contributed to my mental health and, all of the rest of it. So it's interesting how everything just kind of ties up, doesn't it, to the bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think it's always think about your performance goals. What are you trying to achieve by getting on the bike, going on the cross trainer, doing strength training? I just try and encourage people to think about what they're trying to achieve by doing that.
So it's been totally fun. My mind is now completely I'm so fascinated by it, and I'm so fascinated by kind of the vast expanse that this could be. Obviously you're in sport and you're in dance, but I can totally see that this is relevant to so many other sporting contexts, but also professional contexts for sure. But we ask all of our podcasts for their podcast guests for their top 3 tips for thriving. And we do give you warning of this, so it's not just a random. And you can always tell the people who've read our emails, because some people are like, "What?" and others are like, "I've got this nailed."
Well, I hope it's well, from my perspective, when I was thinking about this, I came up with number one is that sense of belonging and connection being so fundamental to thriving, keeping the joy in what you do. There's a brilliant book by Owen Eastwood, who I've done work with before, and then he's a high performance coach, called Belonging. And I totally, it all resonates with me. Just if you feel you belong, you will thrive, whether you're in a law firm or in a veterinary surgery or in a dance environment. And if you don't, you won't. And so it's like looking at that. So I think find belonging and connection with others. Then I was thinking about this thing, which might seem a bit woolly, but it's like believing you are enough. And that I often ask dancers, and we're doing filming for our project, and I ask what they would tell their younger selves. And that comes up every time. And I think in leadership, I was thinking about when I did leadership training, it was that being your authentic self. And I think it took me a long time to be comfortable with kind of who I am as a person and leader in that kind of space. But it really comes down to believing you are enough. So I think to thrive, if you believe that, you will thrive. And then that sort of last one, I guess, again, with my lens, what I'm seeing is that, I think it was Roosevelt that said comparison is the thief of joy. So I think it's a bit of human nature, but you can't see health, you feel it. So if we can try to avoid comparison to others and kind of be more intuitive about what training works for us, what food works for us, like, these what I eat in a day posts, they are not qualified nutritionists. This is just somebody saying what they eat in a day. That is not, it's called food science. I think I said that to you last time. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but I will point to those incredible nutritionists, but they are not, that's not science-backed information. And it's sort of trusting that what's right for you. And I think it's really hard to do, but I think if we can, we thrive more.
Yeah. We've got an incredible source of intelligence if we just listen to every aspect of our body, mind, body, soul, look at what's going on around it. Yeah. It's just taking that and being intentional around it. Perhaps. Absolutely sure. So, yeah, all that's left to be said is a huge thank you, Karen, for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And, we talk a lot about just different views and about sharing knowledge and what we can learn from other industries. And I just think this is a perfect example of how powerful it is, just putting our head above the parapet, seeing what else is going on and just learning from it. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on. And I look forward to following your journey.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you both. It's been brilliant. Yeah, thank you.
So we're back. What a conversation. What a conversation with Karen. I feel enlightened. I so often do feel enlightened after these conversations, but yeah, really, really kind of food for thought. No pun intended.
Yeah, well done. Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation. I think that REDS is possibly something that we've all experienced in the short term. We all know those moments where we've not managed to grab some food or what have you, but actually really thinking about it in the way that she was describing it makes it seem really urgent and important that we spend time educating, talking about these things and helping people understand how they can avoid the long-term effects of just really, I suppose, essentially not eating enough or not eating enough of the right stuff.
And it's so literally just before we hit record, we were both you were kind of chugging a bit of fuel and I was I've eaten nothing today other than some plastic wrapped pain au chocolat, and almost being normalising it. But that's not okay because we are trying to perform at our best. We are trying to record content. We're trying to work. It's even, you don't have to be a professional sports person or professional ballerina to realise that the impact that has just on your ability to perform and sustain performance. It isn't conducive to it.
It's not,
and I guess so much of it
is
also, it's not, which is what we say all the time, but it also comes back into this, you've got to allow yourself a break. You've got to allow yourself kind of the pause and the time to do that, because otherwise it's just not sustainable. That's the point.
I also really liked,
and I loved her. Go on.
I really liked her point about having food in the environment. That's the other thing, isn't it, of making it normal to eat in front of other people, because you never really think of that culturally. And I think most of the places I've worked, it's very normal to go and grab a snack and eat something. But actually, if you're in an environment where that was sort of not acceptable, then I can imagine that would then become quite difficult. And then is it kind of almost feeling like you're doing something naughty and wrong that's to be avoided? So,
well, it's like we talk about, human factors and the system and, making it easy to do the right thing, right? So making food available makes it easy to do the right thing. And that's, I guess that's a huge part of it. Yeah, and I think but it also goes down to what she was saying about the social aspect and, this kind of connection and loneliness. And there's so much culturally around how we eat and how we engage and things like that, I think is really important. But, but also 3 brilliant top tips for thriving. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
I wrote them and they, was it sense of belonging, having joy in what you do and the connection between the two, believe you are enough. I mean, how many of us hope that we inspire that in future generations, but wish we'd believed it ourselves, and comparison is the thief of joy, I think is, we say it, but actually we probably need to live it. Absolutely.
And she did, and there were plenty of tips and quotes that she gave during it of, nothing changes until it does, and risk lies in silence, and all of those kind of things. What I just thought such brilliant wisdom that she was sharing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Exactly. And another just perfect example about how we need to listen to other industries that may not automatically and obviously that they apply to you, but they do. There is always some gems of wisdom that we can take from what other industries have learned, the tough examples that they've seen, the hard lessons, and just borrow that learning, take that learning. We don't need to make the same mistakes. Take that learning and then apply it to what you do and see the impact that it has. And just be conscious about it as well and kind of consciously think about those things, I think is, certainly made me think. Certainly.
Definitely.
And we've got to ask, sorry.
No, just the narrative around these things as well, and how we either the support people when they say things, or when we notice things, or whether we choose not to say it because it's not the right thing to say. I think that was a conversation we maybe had after we'd stopped recording, but a really interesting, typical that we'd stopped recording, but an interesting discussion about, why we react if we do see somebody who's lost weight, then we immediately applaud it. And maybe that's not always the thing to do.
Yeah. And her gem of wisdom, which I really like, because I was for the listeners' benefit, we didn't record this bit, which is classic. Ultimately, I was saying that I always really beat myself up if I see someone who's lost lots of weight, and then I naturally say, "Oh my God, you look amazing," which implies that they didn't look amazing before, but they did. But I don't, it's like socially awkward. And I was like, but any top tips for how to deal with that? And she was saying, well, she tries to say to her kids, don't comment on someone's appearance unless they can change it in 10 seconds. So, that you've got your label hanging out, comment, you've got, she said, bogey hanging off the end of your nose, comment. But everything else, don't, because actually, it's not there to be done. So yeah, really, really interesting conversation. I forgot to ask her where you could find out more. So if people would like to find out more about the work that she does with Red D, you can find that at www.red-d.com. or they're on Instagram at project.red-d. Really interesting work they're doing both in dance, but also Red S is sport. So check them out. And if you've got any dancer friends or sports friends, then then flag them, because I think it's a really hugely relevant conversation. And again, all drives to sustainable performance.
Can I just correct you? The Instagram was not dash, it was _project._d.
Oh, sorry. Look at that, my handwriting.
Just thought I'd say, because before we send people off down a black hole.
Don't _D. Claire needs to be better with her handwriting too. But yeah, no, really awesome conversation again. So much to think about. And I'm off to go and eat something that's more substantial than a pre-wrapped pain au chocolat. See you next time.
Enjoy.